On July 8, 1947, the United States Army reported a crashed flying saucer was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico. But the following day, the Army recanted its sensational claim, stating the debris recovered was nothing more than a lost weather balloon. And for the next 30 years, the United States Army's official weather balloon explanation remained unchallenged and virtually forgotten. However, in 1978, a retired Air Force major named Jesse Marcel, formerly Air Intelligence Officer at Roswell Army Airfield, finally broke silence and revealed the debris he handled at the 1947 Roswell crash was not of this Earth.
It was not anything from this Earth that I'm quite sure of, because being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not be. It could not have been.
However, it should be noted that Marcel made no mention of seeing a crashed saucer or alien bodies, only a vast field of metal fragments scattered over the New Mexico desert. But Marcel's 1979 disclosure unleashed a cascade of testimonies and conjectures that have poured forth from the popular media over all the decades since 1947. Tales of alien bodies, exotic technologies, and captured flying saucers that have embellished Marcel's original account into what has become a vast popular mythos, the UFO urban legend. But despite its global popularity, does this mythos, now termed ufology, offer the light of solid truth at the end of the tunnel, or just an endless, murky labyrinth of smoke and mirror deceptions? A long and winding trail of amazing conjectures and anecdotal accounts that offer no definable proof, creating an enigmatic game of perceptions. To seek the truth in this mysterious game, let's begin our quest by reaching further back in time than the Roswell incident to World War II, when mysterious flying lights called Foo Fighters were reported by bomber pilots flying missions over Nazi Germany.
Oh, we see them too! Mary! What the hell are they? Let's get a look at these. Are they Germans? They're too bright, I can't see. Moving fast! Everybody keep calm.
Were the Foo Fighters seen by bomber squadrons extraterrestrial, or were they German mechanical inventions? Or were they an exotic combination of both? Famed German rocket designer Hermann Oberth cryptically stated that Germany's amazing technologies were just that. We cannot take the credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped. When asked by whom, he replied, "The people of other worlds." And deeper examination of German flying saucer legends reveals secret societies in pre-war Germany were actively seeking contact with extraterrestrial intelligences. Psychic medium Maria Orsic of the Vril Society reported successful telepathic communications with beings from the Aldebaran star system in 1919. German secret societies delved deep into occult sources, determined to unearth alternative propulsion technologies from remote antiquity. Yet despite stories of successful flying saucer projects, the Nazis failed to deploy such miracle weapons to rescue Germany from military defeat. But just 2 years after the war, the flying saucer craze gripped the American imagination. In June of 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported a formation of 9 shiny objects cruising along at an unprecedented speed of 1,600 miles per hour in the vicinity of Mount Rainier, Washington. In Arnold's words, the craft flew like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. And of course, the following month, July 1947, a more astounding event was reported in banner headlines as a crashed flying saucer by the United States Army Bomber Group at Roswell, New Mexico. But 50 years later, Colonel Philip Corso, former National Security Advisor to President Eisenhower, revealed military concern that the alleged spacecraft recovered in the New Mexico desert also displayed suspiciously Nazi origins. Conversations with Wernher von Braun and Willy Ley at Alamogordo in the days after the crash intimated that there was a deeper story about what the Germans had engineered. The similarity between the Horten flying wing and the craft they had pulled out of the Arroyo was no accident. Dr. Hermann Oberth considered the Roswell craft from the New Mexico desert not a spacecraft, but a time machine. Therefore, perhaps the extraterrestrial biological entities described in the medical autopsy reports were humanoid robots rather than life forms, specifically engineered for long-distance travel through space or time. But were these recovered bodies actually aliens, or specimens of Nazi eugenics experiments as well?
So when I started putting all this on the extraterrestrial together, we finally gave it a name. I told them, it looks like, these are clones. And so the name came out, extraterrestrial biological entity. That's what we figured they were. We better describe it. We never used the letters ET. There was no such thing.
You said that they look like clones.
They were clones. Not look like clones. They were clones. We figured that they were created by some other intellect.
In 1947, was the American Southwest really being visited by aliens? Or did the former Nazi scientists and technicians, transplanted at White Sands Proving Grounds with Project Paperclip, bring more with them than just rockets? Whatever the actual facts of the notorious Roswell crash event, the full truth of this classic mystery remains fogged to this day by years of conflicting conjectures. But over the ensuing 70 years, the flying saucer enigma has grown to epic proportions in the public imagination. And yet, despite decades of endless claims and counterclaims to the veracity of this mystery, tales of abductions, alien visitations, nocturnal lights, and bizarre flying machines, absolutely no definitive evidence has yet to surface establishing once and for all that flying saucers are real. As of this moment, the only tangible flying saucer on public display in an aerospace museum is one that the United States Air Force built in 1960, the Avro Disc. Flying saucers have little more physical reality than the countless Hollywood movies that have sensationalized them since 1952. But since 1947, the entire UFO phenomenon has become inextricably interwoven into the psychological warfare operations of our government's intelligence agencies. It is of vital importance to remember that on September 15, 1947, just 3 months after Kenneth Arnold's Mount Rainier sighting sparked the national flying saucer sensation, something far more substantial became unavoidable reality in Washington, D.C. President Harry S. Truman signed into law the National Security Act, which created the National Security Council and America's first peacetime civilian intelligence organization, the CIA. And although Nazi Germany formally surrendered to victorious Allied armies in 1945, by the end of the decade, Nazi Major General Reinhard Gehlen and his entire staff of intelligence operatives were secretly absorbed into the Central Intelligence Agency. Not to mention, the United States Army's rocket program had become home to hundreds of Nazi aerospace engineers under the direction of Wernher von Braun, designer of the infamous V-2 rockets. Project Paperclip had established a control nexus of Nazi psychological warfare specialists deep within our country's body politic at the very time when electronic technology was poised to replace America's addiction to radio with television, an ever more seductive weapon of mass deception invading every home across the land. But the American public had already been thoroughly brainwashed long before the outbreak of World War II. Nephew to famed psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, working for the administration of Woodrow Wilson during World War I, with the Committee on Public Information, had become influential in promoting the idea that America's war efforts were primarily aimed at bringing democracy to all of Europe. Stunned by the degree to which the democracy slogan had swayed the public both at home and abroad, Bernays realized this propaganda model could be employed during peacetime as well. And to avoid the negative implication of the word propaganda used by the Germans in World War I, Bernays renamed the technique public relations. It was Edward Bernays who perfected the scientific technique of opinion molding into the engineering of consent. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind.
Democracy, to my father, was a wonderful concept, but I don't think he felt that all those publics out there had reliable judgment, and that they very easily might vote for the wrong man or want the wrong thing, so that they had to be guided from above. You appeal to their desires and their unrecognized longings, that sort of thing. That you can tap into their deepest desires or their deepest fears and use that to your own purposes.
Do we dare assume that such men as Bernays and the skilled mind manipulators who succeeded him would hesitate to use public fascination with unidentified flying objects as yet another tool for controlling the public mind? By the 1930s, Bernays' mass media hypnosis over the American public was already so deeply ingrained that virtually anything broadcast over network radio was accepted as fact. The insidious mind control potential of mass media was fully demonstrated on Halloween 1938 when CBS Radio broadcast an original dramatization of War of the Worlds as a breaking news event, unleashing hysteria and panic across the United States. Listeners tuned in to what they thought was a terrifying Martian invasion.
We're bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening on the Wilmuth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now it's another one, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me.
And make out a small beam of light against a mirror.
Wait a minute, something's happening. There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks for the automobiles, spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle which took place tonight...
But behind the scenes, this infamous radio broadcast was no careless prank. It was funded indirectly by the Rockefeller Foundation through the Princeton Radio Project, and guided at every stage by members of the Council on Foreign Relations, including psychologist Dr. Paul Lazarsfeld. Frank Stanton, who later became head of CBS Radio and Television, and Dr. Hadley Cantrell, hired Orson Welles to adapt the H.G. Wells classic science fiction book, The War of the Worlds, into a radio drama format in order to study the behavior of citizens under panic conditions. Facing an outraged national audience, director Orson Welles concluded his dramatization with an apologetic disclaimer that it was only intended as a Halloween prank, but to its producers, the program was purposely crafted to create terror. This electronic mass media psychological operation was heard by 6 million people, 1,700,000 of whom believed the broadcast to be genuine, and 1,200,000 of whom were frightened enough to take action either by running away or preparing to fight the Martian invaders. By interrupting what seemed to be a regular music program with a terrifying news bulletin was deemed excessively cruel, manipulative, and deceptive. Allegedly, Orson Welles even received death threats from the Rockefellers should he ever reveal that the unforeseen reaction to this broadcast was precisely what its perpetrators had hoped to achieve and analyze, demographically, psychographically, and statistically. Dr. Hadley Cantrell later wrote a paper entitled The Invasion from Mars, a study in the psychology of panic, which examined the power of the radio broadcast media and its effects upon a population under the direct influence of fear. Only 2 years later, again with Rockefeller Foundation money, Cantrell established the Office of Public Opinion Research at Princeton. Among the studies conducted by the OPOR was analyzing the effectiveness of propaganda produced by the forerunner of the CIA, known as the OSS, or the Office of Strategic Services. During World War II, Edward R. Murrow, also a CFR member, was paid by the Rockefeller Foundation and Dr. Cantrell to monitor Nazi radio propaganda and judge its effectiveness. From this project sprang the FBIS, Foreign Broadcast Intelligence Service, which eventually became the United States Information Agency, used by the National Security Council as its chief disseminator for propaganda after World War II. Upon leaving CBS, Frank Stanton became the chairman of the RAND Corporation, an extremely influential government think tank which researched, among other topics, mass brainwashing of an unsuspecting public through the mass media. Just 4 years after the Orson Welles Martian invasion broadcast, the whole world was at war. In Germany, the Nazi Party had been swept into power in 1933 by staging a successful false flag terror event, burning the Reichstag Parliament building and blaming it on the communists. In turn, the panicked masses granted Adolf Hitler absolute power, from which he proceeded to launch the invasion of Poland in 1939. How fortunate for leaders that men do not think. And for American defense agencies to fight the Nazis, it became vital for them to think like the Nazis. In 1941, OSS Intelligence Director General William Wild Bill Donovan sanctioned development of an Americanized version of Nazi psychological warfare propaganda techniques, which was defined as full-spectrum dominance over all aspects of a target population's interpretive and decision-making faculties by employing all of the techniques of mass communication propaganda and the all-important component, the calculated application of terror. What better place to test the new theories of psychological warfare than among our native populace, the most turned-on, tuned-in, mentally massaged nation on earth, the United States of America. And by 1947, with post-war paperclip Nazis firmly established in American intelligence agencies, as well as Army rocket development projects, President Harry Truman also established Majestic 12, or Magic 12, or simply MJ-12, as a top-secret agency exclusively mandated for UFO research and intelligence. One of MJ-12's prominent members was Gordon Gray, head of Truman's Psychological Strategy Board. Early on, MJ-12 members recognized that if the UFO phenomena itself could not be controlled, the imperative would be to control the public perception of the phenomenon. With this in mind, Air Force General Nathan Twining, also a member of MJ-12, insisted to President Truman that as a psychological warfare issue, The UFO phenomenon was bigger than the Manhattan Project and required that it be managed on a larger scale and obviously for a longer period. They would form nothing less than a government within the government, sustaining itself from presidential administration to presidential administration, regardless of whatever political party took power, and ruthlessly guarding their secrets while evaluating every new bit of information on flying saucers they received. But at the same time, they would allow disclosure of some of the most far-fetched information, whether true or not, because it would help to create a climate of public attitude that would be able to accept the existence of extraterrestrial life without a general sense of panic. Truman's director of the CIA, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, further advised a public disinformation campaign to merely debunk UFOs. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. But Hillenkotter's successor, Walter Beetle Smith, encouraged UFO reporting as a means of PSYOPs disinformation to protect existing secret aircraft projects. So by the end of the 1940s, public perception of UFOs was already being carefully stage managed. Noted French UFO researcher Jacques Vallée, who clearly recognized the mind control link between the UFOs and Nazi propaganda techniques, asked, "What if the deception operations of World War II extended beyond the end of hostilities with Germany?" The enigmatic nature of the UFO phenomena itself generates both fear and wonder, objects of observable yet insubstantial abstraction upon which humans are prone to project either their deepest fears or highest hopes, a nebulous psychological duality which in itself presents useful potential for psychological manipulation by unscrupulous agencies. Historically, fear and wonder have been effective inducements for manipulating mass consciousness. Such mind control techniques were well understood by Hitler's Third Reich. Nazi vengeance weapons, such as the V-1 and V-2 rockets, raining death on England and France, were designed more for their demoralizing psychological effects than as serious tactical weapons. Even the United States Army's atomic bomb was designed for much the same purpose: shock and awe, a single bomb generating a magical ball of fire capable of evaporating an entire city. Since their successful construction in 1945, only 2 atomic devices have been used against human population targets, yet the entire world has been held psychological hostage to potential nuclear terror ever since. In the summer of 1952, CIA Director Walter Beetle Smith sent a memorandum to the director of the Psychological Strategy Board, MJ-12 member Gordon Gray, outlining the CIA's proposal to the National Security Council, stating that the UFO issue presented clear implications for psychological warfare. Smith went on to state, "I suggest that we discuss at an early board meeting the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these UFO phenomena for psychological warfare purposes."
And you talked to him, you asked him?
I have, more or less on gestures and mental telepathy, as it is known talk transfer.
He does not speak. I mean, they
He
don't have
didn't at the time, but I have met him since, and he does speak very well English as well as in the other language.
Did he tell you where he came from?
Yes, this time he told me he was from Venus, although I have met men from other planets as well.
Also by 1952, California UFO contactee George Adamski, who claimed observing unidentified flying objects as early as 1946, had earned national notoriety as the Pied Piper of the Aliens from Space Gospel, with his many books and lectures on the subject. And while Adamski was later dismissed as a con man, self-proclaimed contactee Howard Menger followed suit as a man who copied a con man and whom during one television interview admitted as much. Yet once again dismissing Adamski and Menger as UFO con man crackpots is not as simple as it seems. because solid evidence exists that at least these two individuals were acting as part of an intelligence-backed operation. Menger also admitted that he worked for the CIA and that his story was part of an experiment to test public reactions to the idea of extraterrestrial contact, to see how easily and who specifically could be fooled into believing anything. Adamski, who claimed to be in contact with a distinctly Aryan-looking blonde spaceman from Venus, was actively supported and assisted by the CIA for the same purpose. This became known when scientists, attempting to discredit Adamski, were warned off by the new CIA director, Alan Dulles, in person. And research has shown that during tours of Europe and Australia to promote his message, Adamski traveled on a passport furnished by the CIA. During a 1953 speech, Adamski even calmed an anxious crowd by assuring the audience that the CIA and the FBI had cleared his statements. The idea that contactees such as Adamski should have been spreading their message with the blessings and backing of the CIA seems at first bizarre. However, when we consider the very real benefits for psychological warfare purposes of setting up and monitoring such experiments, into the way that cult beliefs spread and the influence that they have over certain segments of the population, the motive becomes apparent. It is curious to note how government mind control operations closely parallel modern history of the UFO phenomenon. In 1953, directorship of the CIA had been assumed by Alan Dulles, who ordered Jewish psychologist Sidney Gottlieb to create Project MK-Ultra for the alleged purpose of developing mind-controlled drugs in response to communist Russian, Chinese, and North Korean use of mind control techniques against American prisoners of war held in Korea, such as truth serums, selective memory loss, hypnotic programming, and screen memories. Of course, the Nazi-controlled CIA, exploiting Cold War fear of communism, would not hesitate to instigate PSYOPs programs against the American population as well. By 1962, classic film The Manchurian Candidate explicitly showcased just how sophisticated Cold War applications of just 1 year earlier, in 1961, an interracial couple was allegedly abducted by gray aliens while traveling the backroads of New Hampshire. Betty and Barney Hill eventually gained national notoriety from this sensational UFO abduction, but the so-called alien mind control techniques revealed in their account were virtually identical to the same Cold War mind control techniques showcased in the Manchurian Candidate movie.
I'm thinking I'm asleep.
Asleep in the car?
I'm asleep and I've got to wake up. I don't want to be asleep. I keep trying to wake up. And then I open my eyes. I'm walking through the woods. I open my eyes quick and I shut them again.
And Barney is behind you?
There's a couple of men behind me, and then there's Barney. There's a man on each side of him. And my eyes are open, but Barney's still asleep. He's walking and he's asleep. And then I begin to get mad. And I said to myself, who the heck are these characters and what do they think they're doing? And I turn around and I say, Barney, wake up. Barney, why don't you wake up? And I'm getting really annoyed at Barney. And I say, Barney, wake up. Is Barney his name? And I wouldn't answer. And then the leader, there's no reason to be afraid. We just want to do some tests. And then when the tests are over, we'll take you and Barney back to your car. You'll be on your way back home in no time. And then come to a clearing. And there was, I wish it were light so I could get a better picture of it. There's a ramp to the door. The object was on the ground. The moon sitting on the ground.
The object was on the ground?
I think that's the same one I saw in the sky. And I thought it was the moon. Go inside?
Along with standard mass media PR mind control was an even deeper, darker mind control program masked as alien abductions being deployed against the entire American public in general. Dr. Helmut Lammer, author of My Labs, Military Mind Control and Alien Abduction, observed, "It would be easy for psychiatrists or psychologists who work for secret military intelligence agencies to create alien abduction scenarios that appear similar to real abduction encounters. Drug-induced hallucinations and related psychological processes have long been studied by researchers into hallucinogenic imagery." But since most MKUltra records were deliberately destroyed in 1973 by order of CIA Director Richard Helms, it has been difficult, if not impossible, for investigators to gain complete understanding of the more than 150 individually funded research projects sponsored by MKUltra programs. To avoid liability, these projects have been discreetly moved into private corporate interests. Today these projects have resurfaced as transhuman artificial intelligence research, the ultimate mind control program, destined to turn the entire population into fully automated cyborg robots.
Manufacturing consent. What is that title meant to describe?
Well, the title is actually borrowed from a book by Walter Lippmann, written back around 1921, in which he described what he called the manufacture of consent as a revolution in the practice of democracy. What it amounts to is a technique of control. And he said this was useful and necessary because the common interests, the general concerns of all people, elude the public. The public just isn't up to dealing with them, and they have to be the domain of what he called a specialized class. Notice that that's the opposite of the standard view about democracy. There's a version of this expressed by the highly respected moralist and theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who was very influential on contemporary policymakers. His view was that rationality belongs to the cool observer, but because of the stupidity of the average man, he follows not reason but faith. And this naive faith requires necessary illusion. The point is that in a military state or a feudal state or what we would nowadays call a totalitarian state, it doesn't much matter what people think because you've got a bludgeon over their head and you can control what they do. But when the state loses the bludgeon, when you can't control people by force, and when the voice of the people can be heard, you have this problem. It may make people so curious and so arrogant that they don't have the humility to submit to a civil rule, and therefore you have to control what people think. And the standard way to do this is the resort to what in more honest days used to be called propaganda, manufacture of consent, creation of necessary illusions, various ways of either marginalizing the general public or reducing them to apathy.
William Casey, former corporate lawyer and successor to George Bush as CIA director, once boasted, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." The public perception of the UFO phenomena is no less managed by the same specialized class of financial elite who manufacture public consent, financial elite who would not hesitate to test public reactions to the idea of extraterrestrial contact to see how easily and who specifically could be fooled into believing anything. Today, the UFO phenomenon, once such a formidable challenge to defense authorities, has been fully commercialized, tamed, and trivialized into urban legend nonsense.
And the ancient astronaut theory suggests that this is a direct result of extraterrestrials tampering with our DNA. So we're half human and half extraterrestrial. We're hybrids.
Hi. I'm Paul, and I really need your help. Want to know?
A modern cultural mythology sharing History Channel airtime with absurd redneck reality shows or overwrought space war spectacles at IMAX theaters. Marginalized, packaged, and conveniently wrapped so as not to disturb our cozy day-to-day consumer reality existence. Since the 1930s and the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, mass propaganda has become even more compelling with the advent of visual media, and the masters of mind control know that. Much of the general population accepts whatever they see on television as fact as well, and so elaborate Hollywood-style staging of news with space flights, moonwalks, and terrorist attacks specifically crafted for video production presents a contrived hypnotic perception of reality to a mesmerized public. Even amazing whistleblower revelations that dominate popular internet alternative news websites can be just as easily contrived and controlled by the same corporate interests that have been engineering public consent for decades. The free flow of accurate information is fundamental to the political health of any democratic social structure. The daily life of individuals in any society depends upon free exchange of accurate information regarding food, energy, public safety, and general well-being. As such, we depend upon the integrity of the public press and governing officials to present truthful information to the population they serve, with the understanding that a properly informed population is fully capable of making sound decisions for the common good, which is why freedom of the press was clearly specified in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Unfortunately, the historical reality has been that the wealthy minority who own the country believe it is their right to govern it, not the general public's. Thus, the wealthy elite view the mass majority as incapable of governing. Therefore, management responsibility must be held by the specialized, moneyed class. And today this specialized class, the empire of money, or corporate elite, in fact manages the American nation behind a facade of democracy. Corporatism is fascism.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
And freedom of the press betrayal of the American public by the wealthy elite has never been more apparent than over the course of the 2016 presidential campaign. Reported with an unprecedented display of journalistic irresponsibility, corrosive ineptitude, and deliberate deceit. The mass media has of itself become a threat to the very constitutional authority that protects it. How can we expect truth from an industry that of itself is guilty of criminal collusion by foisting decades of fake news fabrications upon the national population they speciously claim to serve? Freedom of the press has become tyranny of the press, shamelessly manipulated by the moneyed class who own it. And now, after nearly 3/4 of a century, to expect honest disclosure of UFO truth from the mainstream media seems more unlikely than ever. Even if television reporters announced an alien landing today, who would believe them? They've destroyed their own credibility. The media has for decades crafted such a pervasively false perception of reality that any genuine truth is now virtually irrelevant. Is E.T. really visiting Earth? Do ETs even exist? Did a craft from outer space really crash at Roswell? Or has our own government been tinkering with free energy anti-gravity flying machines ever since World War II and using the whole UFO issue just as a clever cover-up? Is our entire planet nothing more than a corporate concentration camp? Undoubtedly, the wealthy elite still hold the winning hand in this muddled game of UFO perceptions, just as they have since 1947. And unless an awakened public rises to challenge this tyranny, the elite will likely keep this issue marginalized and safely tucked in the dustbin of urban legends for as long as it suits their purpose.